Yes, good to have you with us this morning. Plenty to talk about indeed, and you can join the conversation as ever right through the morning. Just use the hashtag BBC Sunday Show on social media if you want to do that. Now then, on the face of it, Scotland's two governments aren't getting along too well, are they? Earlier this year, Westminster blocked Holyrood's plans for gender recognition reform, to the fury, you'll recall, of many MSPs. Now there is the row over the deposit return scheme for bottles and cans. The Scottish Government says it's ready to go, but last week, Westminster said, oh no you don't, and delivered a list of conditions that will have to be met before the project gets the go-ahead. The First Minister wrote to the Prime Minister yesterday, giving him 48 hours to withdraw those restrictions, or the scheme itself may be, if you'll excuse the pun, canned. It was, he said, a major erosion of the devolution settlement. There is a common theme to these interventions, of course, and that theme is the Secretary of State for Scotland. Well, I'm happy to say that we can speak to him this morning here on the Sunday Show. Alister Jack, good morning to you.
Good morning, Martin.
Thank you very much indeed for being with us this morning. Right, the First Minister has asked the Prime Minister to overturn your government's position on the deposit return scheme for tomorrow, or the whole project is in jeopardy, we're told. Should he overturn it?
No, we've given an exclusion. There are 4 conditions in that exclusion which allow the schemes to work across the United Kingdom. So for those that don't know, it means there'll be a single barcode system. It means that if you're a membership of one scheme in the UK, you'll have reciprocal arrangements with all the other schemes, so you don't have extra costs of joining different schemes. There is no glass involved. That's obviously another condition. And we believe that that makes sense, because that's what industry have written to us and industry have asked us to do. And I haven't had a single letter from a business supporting the proposed scheme that Lorna Slater brought forward, whereas I have had over 1,000 letters of concern, and it's those concerns that we've taken into account when we've come to our conclusion, because we believe that the last point that we made was the deposit charge should be the same, reciprocated across the UK. If I get off the train in Carlisle and buy some recyclable material and it's 20 pence, I don't, or 10 pence in Carlisle and 20 pence in Dumfries, so I double my money. That makes no sense.
Sure. I mean, look, there's loads to get into from that one answer alone. That'll keep us going for quite a while. Let me get into the interconnected nature of this scheme then. Wales had a plan. It involved bottles. You had signed it off along the way. They made it in consultation with you and with the Northern Irish Assembly. Northern Ireland doesn't have a functioning government at the moment, so let's set them to one side just now. Scotland had a plan. It involved glass as well. England was the outlier here. And as Mark Drakeford was saying this week, in 4 nations cases like this, Westminster is acting as the English government. What gives you the right to say you have to fall in line with us, we have primacy here? They had a scheme that was going to work perfectly and was interconnected. Why don't you join that?
Well, first of all, Wales haven't asked for an exemption, but they have consulted on glass, but there's been no exemption request. Northern Ireland aren't including glass. The situation is that we have a UK Internal Market Act, and that works alongside devolution. That is a protector of devolution. The UK Internal Market Act came after we left the EU. It's to protect the single market within the UK, and that 60% of Scotland's trade is with the rest of the UK. So we listen to the concerns of businesses and consumers, and we decided that to have the Scottish Government can go ahead with their scheme first, but it has to be a scheme that then dovetails into the other schemes in the UK.
As long as they meet English conditions. That's not a 4 nations approach here, is it?
Well, this is the thing about the UK Internal Market Act. We have to protect our single market with mutual recognition and non-discrimination, as the EU did. Had we been in the EU still, the Scottish Government would have come to us, to the UK Government, as members of the EU, and said, this is our scheme, can we do it? And the EU would have come back and said, and I've checked this with some EU authorities, they would have come back and said, well, yes, but you have to do it as one United Kingdom. We can't, you have to protect internal markets and not have disruption to the drinks industry. And we knew that because French wine producers had told us that they wouldn't be relabeling just for Scotland for glass. It was too small a market, so they would sell their wine elsewhere.
Sure. I mean, look, there were various issues with this, and some have suggested that actually you shouldn't necessarily, first law of politics, don't interrupt your opponent when they're making mistakes. But I mean, you say that you've had contact from big producers.
On that point, I mean, I was very clear from the dispatch box and in inter-ministerial government meetings from the beginning of this year, before an exemption was asked for on the 6th of March. I was clear all the way along that the schemes had to be interoperable across the UK.
But they would be if you joined the Scottish and Welsh schemes.
Well, there are problems. There are serious problems. I mean, the British glass industry have written to us and said, look, this is not recycling glass, the Scottish scheme. The Circularity Scotland are going to crush it and put it into aggregate for roads. We believe the scheme should be melting it, as happens with the current local authority schemes. It should be melted and then recycled for bottles. And we agreed with that. There were other issues around contamination. If a bottle falls into the bin and it breaks and there's a shard of less than 10 millimeters, that shard then contaminates all the recyclable material in that bin, and it goes to landfill. There were lots of practical problems that we listened to, and we listened to industry. We listened to the Scotch Whisky Association, for instance, who said, please don't do glass. It will cost us jobs and it will cost trade.
Did you listen to the people who make Tennent's Lager, who said taking glass out of the plan is a massive threat to investment, businesses and jobs? Or to Coca-Cola, who said, get on with it, Scotland, this is ready to go, we're buying into this completely? There are arguments on both sides. Or did you listen to the Wine and Spirit Trade Association, who gave you a 20 grand donation to your party?
So there aren't arguments on both sides, because I've spoken to Coca-Cola. They've come to Dover House, and they are very keen on a one-state solution across the United Kingdom. And here's the important point. You must give me time to make this point. The managing director of C&C, who owns Tennent's, wrote to me on Friday, copied the First Minister's letter to me on Friday, and he said, and I quote, and it's only 6 lines, please find enclosed the letter we sent to Humza Yousaf, Scotland's First Minister, setting out our position following last weekend's UK internal market announcement. Regrettably, specific passages from this letter were leaked to the media, misrepresenting C&C Tennent's position on DRS. C&C Group, Tennent's, is actively seeking and supports a UK-wide scheme introduced at the same time across the 4 UK nations. A single UK-wide scheme has been our preferred outcome since 2017.
Okay, fine. Look, that doesn't get past my point, that there could be a single scheme across the 4 nations if you subscribe to one that's ready to go. We're now going to have to wait until 2025, you say, probably many years past that, before the UK scheme is ready to go. Last time you came onto this programme, last time we persuaded you to come on, 3 prime ministers ago, I might add, was the eve of the COP26 summit, a long time back. You said back then, I'm not signing off on a Section 30 order, because forget independence, forget everything else, the environment is the only thing that matters. And now we're delaying schemes by years.
Well, the environment does matter, but I would argue that if you include glass, you kill Edinburgh Local Authority, for instance. They recycle glass. Many local authorities in Scotland, they recycle the glass. It underpins their recycling model curbside, and we're very good at it. You take the bottles away and you leave them in the jam jars, their recycling model falls over.
But that's not your job to butt in there, is it? That's not the Internal Market Act that's at play there. The Internal Market Act, by the way, that the Scottish Government didn't buy into, that doesn't come into it. You're accused now of using the Internal Markets Act to consistently block what the Scottish Parliament votes to do.
The Internal Market Act angle is that 85% of the glass that would have been, or the recyclable products, should I say, that goes into the scheme in Scotland comes from outside Scotland. And that's why the Internal Market Act's at play here. The Internal Market Act is about protecting jobs and protecting a seamless trade across the United Kingdom for all industries. And we have given a very quick response. We were asked on the 6th of March. We have acted really swiftly, as we did with the previous exemption that we were asked for on plastic cutlery. We've acted really swiftly. We've come up with a solution that deals with the concerns that businesses have. And if you're trying to tell me that the Law Legislator scheme has been widely accepted and hailed across Scotland as a great scheme, then I don't think you've been speaking to the right people.
Well, that doesn't necessarily come into it. It was the scheme that the Scottish Parliament voted for. Listen, let me move this on a little bit.
But Martin, on that point, there is a UK Internal Market Act. It is to protect the single market. It is to protect trade, and therefore we have to be cognizant of that when we take our decisions.
Let me move this. Let me stay roughly with this point and move it on, because I was looking online last night in preparation for this, and I found this. It's a document that your government signed at the start of last year, the Review of Intergovernmental Relations, laying out new structures and ways of working built on principles of mutual respect and trust between the governments of the UK, providing a positive basis for productive relations, dialogue where views are aligned, and resolution mechanisms where they're not. How is that working out for you at the moment?
So I think it's working well. I mean, I've been very clear in the last 2 interministerial government meetings I've attended with Lauren Slater, for instance. I was very clear where our concerns lay, so she knew going into that on the DRS. we have lots of positive things happening. We've got free ports. We're looking at investment zones, discussing that with the Scottish Government. We've got the city and region growth deals. In fact, the UK Gov has £2.2 billion of investment going into Scotland, dealing directly with local authorities and the Scottish Government on that. And we're working very. But there are a few things where devolution boundaries are being stretched, or they're cutting across the new world we live in outside the EU, where I've had to take difficult decisions. But those decisions I've taken because it's my responsibility to protect devolution, to uphold the Constitution, and not have conflict within the United Kingdom, because legislation created either cost jobs or in the case of GRR, undermines, has adverse effects on the Equalities Act.
John Swinney doesn't agree. John Swinney has said to Scotland on Sunday today, the climate of dialogue since Johnson and Jack came in has deteriorated. It is now dysfunctional. It's a seismic deterioration in relations. Would you say to him?
Well, so John Swinney wants to break up the United Kingdom. He brought forward, for instance, the United Nations Rights of the Child legislation, a protocol the UK government had adopted in 1992. And he brought it forward just before the 2021 elections in May to Holyrood. And I wrote to him in March 2021, and I said, your legislation cuts across reserved areas, clauses 6 and 19 to 21. John Swinney didn't come back to me and say, how can we fix this legislation? John Swinney stood up in Parliament and called me menacing and waved my letter around. That's not constructive dialogue. So I'm not going to take any lessons from John Swinney.
OK, let me ask you about something different. Should Rishi Sunak hand over all his WhatsApp messages and diaries to the COVID-19 inquiry, like Boris Johnson, your friend, did? Yes. All the relevant messages should be handed over. I mean, he's not being asked for the relevant messages, is he? He's been asked for all of them. And this is now another kind of set of confusion and chaos that your government's embroiled itself in, suing its own and taking its own inquiry to court because it doesn't trust the judge that it appointed.
Well, I think the COVID inquiry should be fine. It should be looking at what happened and then how we can be better prepared for the future. And any data going to it, any details going to it, should be relevant to COVID. I mean, it shouldn't be.
Who chooses what's relevant?
I think anyone in the country is going to think that WhatsApp messages that the Prime Minister shared with his wife or anyone else should be going to the COVID inquiry.
Should the judge decide what's relevant?
Well, it is going to court, so the judge will decide.
Yeah, OK. I mean, look, this is the most important public inquiry in living memory. Almost 250,000 people died with COVID on their death certificates. There's visceral hatred in households up and down the country about the way your government performed and behaved during that crisis. This is so important that this is trustworthy and trusted by the public, this inquiry. Do you understand how this looks at the moment? That there are items being withheld, that there's a lack of trust already?
I do understand, but I think the point I make is all relevant documents and messages. We've already submitted 55,000 documents, but they should all be relevant. Private WhatsApps between family members and other things should not be going into this inquiry, which have got nothing to do with COVID. It could be a very personal matter. It could be anything you wouldn't know what it is, but it's just not relevant to have private conversations being brought into this. This is about COVID messaging and COVID discussions, and all the official meetings that took place were minuted, and all those minutes will also be submitted.
All right, Alister Jack, we will see how that develops over the coming days and weeks perhaps. Alister Jack, Secretary of State for Scotland, thank you very much indeed for your time on the Sunday show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.